From the Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University in Houston, Texas, this is Baker Briefing, and I am Ed Emmett. Today's fascinating topic, flooding in the Houston area, and the question that goes with that. Are we ready for the next big storm? It's been 6 years since the rains of Harvey devastated the Houston area. Over 4 days or so, the storm dumped as much as 50 inches of rain and caused an estimated $125 billion in damages. The storm claimed 36 lives in Harris County alone. This was really the storm that changed the Houston region. According to the University of Houston, the vast majority of county residents were affected by the storm in one way or another. Following the storm, upwards of 90% of residents of this area supported policy action to mitigate the impact of future natural disasters. But here we are 6 years later, and the question is, are we ready for another one? And the answer to that question, according to my guest today, is no. I'm here with Jim Blackburn, a faculty scholar at the Baker Institute and professor in the practice of environmental law at Rice University. Jim, thank you very much for being here.
Well, sure, Ed. It's nice to be here with you.
So, I'm going to go into a few questions, but they're going to be based off, you published an op-ed recently in the Houston Chronicle, where you argued that the city, probably the entire area, remains vulnerable to flooding, and that the Houston mayoral candidates aren't talking enough about the city's storm readiness. And you pointed out that, frankly, our lives and livelihoods depend on it. So why aren't the candidates for mayor talking about it, and why don't you think we're ready?
Well, I think the candidates aren't talking about it because historically the city has been less involved in flooding than the county has. And I think that there's kind of a feeling of complacency sometimes at the city that it's being handled by others. And I think that that's just the wrong attitude to have about it. I think there's as important of a role for the city as there is for the county in a lot of respects. So I would say that's why. I guess the other thing is the constituency isn't demanding it. And I was trying to see if we could generate a conversation.
Well, that's good. So let's back up and take that on a little bit. As I said earlier, leading in, following Harvey, there was a lot of political will to make the city and the county much more storm resilient. In fact, in 2018, 86% of Harris County voters approved a $2.5 billion bond for flood control. What's happened since? Why does the public not seem to be engaged?
Well, I think the public has a short memory. I think Harvey did penetrate more than any storm that we've had because it affected the whole region. And most of the time we have a rain in the northeast side or the south side or whatever. Harvey was a comprehensive storm, if you will. It impacted north, south, east, and west. But it was, 2017. It's been several years. It's been 6 years. And the public's memory is short. If you look outside, I think this last weekend we had rainfall, but it's been dry for a while. And, drought means people forget about things like rainfall and big storms. So I think it's the urgency may have declined since there hadn't been a big storm lately.
So leaving the public, let's talk about some of the actions that have been taken. Obviously, I know very well the county said our building codes weren't right. At the time of Harvey, the building codes in Harris County said you had to build 18 inches above the 100-year floodplain. We changed that to say you have to build 2 feet above the 500-year floodplain. I guess that's helped with the new building that's been done, but that doesn't take into consideration what's already been built, nor does it take into consideration inside the various municipalities. I know if you just look, you've seen a lot of projects on Brays Bayou and other places. We've seen a lot of detention and retention ponds. Have we improved, though, a little bit?
Oh, yeah. I think absolutely we've improved. I mean, the bond issue that you were so instrumental in getting passed, I think, has done a tremendous amount to increase infrastructure. The criticism I would have is that that was all designed to the old 100-year floodplain. It was designed to the old rainfall. Harvey redefined rainfall, and then Imelda coming after it, even more so probably, defined. I've had people tell me they think that and people that know what they're talking about, tell me that they think probably a real 100-year rainfall for Houston, maybe in the 24 inches in 24-hour range, We've just changed and we're redoing our floodplain maps based on 17 to 19 inches, depending on where you are, in 24 hours rather than the old 13 inches. But the point is, the rainfall is changing. And the way we do our statistics, our kind of standard way of engineering these practices, is to look to the past rather than to look to the future. And I think we've got to change our fundamental approach to climate change, to increased rainfall, and to getting ahead of these storms. We're making improvements, but the rainfall's getting bigger. So it's a funky game we're involved in here that has tragic consequences for failure.
You know, we've seen cases in the past, and I don't remember how long ago it was, but Harris and Galveston County went together and basically banned the pumping of groundwater to limit subsidence. We've actually seen Brownwood subdivision and others like in Baytown, they went completely into the bay because of the pumping of groundwater. So we eliminated that. But what are some of the key steps that need to be taken going forward in your mind? Well,
I think there's steps to be taken at the state, federal, local, county, city level. Everybody across the board, I think, needs to kind of refocus on the current problem. The Corps of Engineers is unable to, for example, the big coastal spine they've developed. Very interesting proposal, but it only can work for storms with a recurrence interval of 50 years. According to the statistics, the big storms, the Cat 3, 4s, and 5s, are more than 50-year storms. So they're only building a $30 billion project for Category 1 and 2 storms. Beyond that, it doesn't help us. And Harris County is extremely vulnerable. The east side of Houston, very vulnerable to surge flooding, even if the coastal spines developed. We've got to change methodologies. We've got to change our way of thinking. We're redoing the floodplain maps for Harris County, but they're being redone on this Atlas 14, NOAA Atlas 14 standard, and it's already obsolete. And so we're talking about building things today that are supposed to last 50 or 75 years. And we're not thinking 50 to 75 years ahead to try to anticipate how much sea level rise will there be. How much will the storm surge be increased by the increase in magnitude of the storms because of climate change. Those are things we don't talk about. We've denied climate change in Texas forever. The industries are now talking about doing something about their carbon footprint, but I think the government is way behind in discussions about climate change, and I think that has to change.
So a couple of follow-ups. You kept saying we are revising the floodplain maps.
We as Harris County.
Okay, but who actually does the floodplain maps? What's FEMA's role versus?
Well, FEMA is certainly a key participant. It's their maps. Harris County is one of the few counties in the United States that actually can do some of the computer modeling that goes with that work. But it's a joint venture, I would say, between Harris County and FEMA, but it will be a FEMA product. There's no question about that. It will be a federal government map. I think FEMA needs to totally rethink the way that they approach the floodplain regulations. I think that, again, one can argue to some extent they perpetuate damage as much as they solve damage problems. And I'm no great fan of the 100-year floodplain program, mainly because I think it's continually playing catch-up, just like the Corps of Engineers process is playing catch-up. We've got to have hard discussions about climate change, get ahead of it, and then I think we'll be square, and I think that's across the board, state, federal, county, city.
You mentioned the coastal spine, and I know in dealing with the public, they get confused. Harvey was not a hurricane when it hit us.
That's correct.
It was just a big rainstorm left over from a hurricane. Coastal spine, that's designed to protect from the storm surge, but as strange as it seems, I've tried to tell people, and I know you agree with this, hurricanes in a way are easier than a Harvey rainstorm. If you think back to our major floods, Harvey, Tax Day, Memorial Day, even Alicia, that was water coming from the sky, not water coming in. We haven't had really a hurricane since Ike of any note?
No, not
of
with
any size.
With any surge. Anyway.
And that's 15 years. Oh, yeah. So how do we educate the public the difference between a major rainstorm and a hurricane? They fear a hurricane, but they really need to be fearing some of these rainstorms.
Oh, I think we need to fear both, but they pose different risks. Rainfall flooding, generally, it rains, the water rises into your house, It absolutely destroys your livelihood, your house, but it's probably not as life-threatening as the surge that comes from the Gulf with a big storm like an Ike. If Ike had hit 30 miles down the coast, we would have had the worst environmental disaster in U.S. history and would probably have killed a couple of thousand people because no one evacuated because it was quote-unquote only a Category 2 storm, but it had a Category 4 surge. Ike caused the Weather Service to revise the way that they predict storms, with the storm surge being talked about separately than category. That's important.
No, I remember that well, and in fact, when you say 30 miles down the coast, for our listeners, it went in over Bolivar.
Yeah, we're kind of right up the middle of Galveston Bay.
Yeah, it went in over Bolivar. If it had gone in over San Luis Pass, we would have been in a world of hurt, and the west end of Galveston Island would have been pretty much wiped out.
Well,
completely.
But I think the ship channel industries would
That's
have been
what I mean.
too. Yeah,
it would have been on the dirty side of the storm.
Woo, and that's one that I'm most worried about, just because those industries are pretty good up until about 15 feet of surge. But once we get 20, 25 feet of surge, we've got about 2,000 storage tanks that are full of oil and hazardous substance that will get hit with surge, and surge is violent. Surge will pick up containers and will take them inland, and it'll just smash the storage vessels, the storage tanks. It'll just smash them. It's harsh. It's different than rainfall flooding.
And the other memory I think a lot of people have after Hurricane Ike, Bolivar Peninsula, there was that one lone greenhouse that was left standing. And you go there now, Bolivar's completely rebuilt.
It is rebuilt. Again, most of those homes at least have flood insurance up to the federal minimum. So there is at least some underwriting of the cost. They're built to the standards of that one building. I mean, that building that stood has become the model for all of the new ones. And whether that's enough, well, we'll see. Because another storm is coming. There's no question.
So how do we get the public involved? You've talked a lot about the importance of public information about storm readiness. When a hurricane's coming, it's pretty easy. You know, people watch intently the television and the meteorologist. But just in general, how do we get people to understand when they go buy a house, when they build a building, the dangers that they might face? Not to scare people from living here, but just so they understand.
I think we have to talk truth. And I think in this regard, I think historically, floodplains were always considered developmental red tape. I don't think they ever were really thought of as a danger. I think we need to change the basic understanding. We don't want people in the floodplain. We're going to need to make room for water. That's a logo we hear around town, but I would tell you there's very little definition behind what it means to live with water. We're going to need more room for water in our community. We're going to need to evacuate these high-risk areas. If we just were truthful about where floods have occurred in the past, how deep, for example, the surge down in Clear Lake. We had a wonderful marker that was put in after Ike that lasted about 2 months because it interfered with home sales. I think we've got to be very cognizant that identifying risk is maybe more important than home sales. And that's a controversial statement in this part of the world, but I think that's where we failed, is that we have not emphasized announcing risk and being clear about risk versus economic impacts. We're more inclined to be partial to economic impacts than risk truth.
But we do have some success stories. I think you were a participant in one. After Tropical Storm Allison, I said Alicia earlier.
Yeah, Allison is Allison.
The one. Alicia was the 83 hurricane. Allison was the, 2001 tropical storm. The medical center flooded, but the medical center hadn't flooded since then because of some work that's been done.
Well, the Speed Center, Phil Beedian over at Speed Center, among other things, set up a warning system for the medical center, and they get advance warning of when a flood may be coming down Brays Bayou. They have the ability to wall off basically the underground entrances. They have storm gates that come down, and they call the people that are coming to work and say, don't come. They tell the people that are there, prepare to stay for a while. And they've got a bona fide flood plan. They've got a warning system. I think it's what the entire region needs. And I'm not sure we've got, again, either the resources or perhaps the will to do that. But boy, that would be important to my mind.
And along those same lines, there was one watershed I won't say it didn't flood at all, but the Sims Bayou watershed came through Harvey better than any other place.
That's correct.
Because a lot of projects had been completed thanks to Commissioner L. Franco Lee, who had been in office at that time. He's since deceased, unfortunately. So there are things, I'm baiting you here, there are things that can be done to protect people.
Oh, there's no question. But, like up on Greens and Halls Bayous, they've never qualified for a federal program because of the way the federal rules work. Our congressional delegates should be working that issue. We should be changing the way the Corps of Engineers evaluates where flood projects should go, because we traditionally use dollar cost, which works well in higher income areas, but in lower income areas, we should be talking about number of homes protected, number of people that are benefited, as opposed to just the dollar benefits of it, because in lower income areas, the dollar benefits are hard to meet. There's a new project on Hunting Bayou, and it qualified because there was a whole lot of storage facilities from a commercial standpoint that created enough value to be able to qualify it, not because of the lower income homes. Those are the people that need our help, and they're not getting it.
Yeah, it's backwards.
It's backwards.
I think everybody agrees to that. So,
but why can't we change it? That's what is so frustrating to me on the outside of the political process, is how come we can't get these changes made? Because so many of them are common sense.
So, since you brought us back to the political process, let's go back to where we began, and I'll give you the final word. What should the candidates for mayor be talking about? And I know political consultants will say you need to talk about what the public cares about right now. But isn't part of leadership talking about things that you need the public to be aware of? And in my mind, maybe it's because I was around during Harvey, flooding is still the number one issue we're going to face long term.
Well, I agree 100%. I think that leadership would be, to my mind, to talk about things that are maybe unpleasant, but are incredibly important to the future of the region. And nothing is more so than flooding. So, I agree with you that this is what I would like to see. I think you and I are in perfect accord that these are the types of topics that should be discussed, with appreciation of the roles that the city has, the county has. The candidates need to understand that. And part of what I'd like to know is how much they do know about these differences, because there are distinct roles and there are areas of strength that both have. And the key is them working together for the future of Houston. If the city and the county don't work together, we're not going to get anywhere.
Well, on that note, Jim, we appreciate the work you're doing, and I know the public will benefit greatly from it. So thank you for being.
Well, and let me give a compliment back to you. Your leadership has probably put us in a better position than we have ever been. And, I look to you for more of that leadership.
Well, thank you. I'm glad we're both here at the Baker Institute to do what we can. Baker Briefing is brought to you by the Baker Institute for Public Policy, which provides meaningful policy analysis on the most critical challenges facing Texas, the U.S., and the world. Baker Briefing is produced by Victoria Jupp and Shannon Moriarty. AV production is led by Kevin Young and Andrew Murillo. To learn more, including how you can attend a live podcast recording on the campus of Rice University, visit us at bakerinstitute.org. Thank you for listening.